All right, so you've probably seen the news by now. The internet is blowing up with it that Sam Altman has declared a code red to try and catch up with Gemini because they were caught with their pants down or whatever. Plenty of people are going to do an analysis on OpenAI's code red and their Sam Altman specific words, but what I want to focus on is really the competitive dynamics. And, again, not to bury the lead, but the entire point of a free market is for competition to make consumers win. Now, OpenAI has definitely enjoyed their time in the sun where they had very clear market dominance. But right now, data is piling up that people are spending more time with Gemini than they are on ChatGPT on a daily basis. And then you combine that with Anthropic eating their lunch on enterprise and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the jumping off point. And I wanted to provide some context, and what I'm going to really focus on is how and why I think Gemini is pulling ahead of OpenAI, which is causing the code red in the first place. So just yesterday, a friend of mine who's a postdoc researcher, one of the best in the world in his field, he's worked with the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as NASA and a bunch of other folks in computational fluid dynamics and oceanography and climate. So his research is top notch. And, when O1 and O3 came out, he was like, oh, wow, these tools are pretty good. And, they weren't quite good enough to really help him with, frontier Navier-Stokes stuff and that sort of thing. But, they were helpful. They were good at writing code and doing stuff for MATLAB. And then in the last couple of weeks, he was texting me just saying like, oh man, ChatGPT is kind of lame. It's not that good at writing. What is better at academic writing and that sort of thing? I was like, you should try Gemini. I don't use Claude that much for those sorts of things, but try Gemini. So finally he got a Gemini Ultra subscription or whatever. And he's like, wow, this is so much better. And I just got a follow-up text saying, this has saved me so much time with work. It's way better than GPT-5. And one of the things that he said was that it's just better keeping up with the actual point of the conversation, which is something that I have also noticed and complained about. Whereas ChatGPT gets bogged down in, well, actually, it's more concerned about fact-checking and wagging its finger at you for making mistakes than just keeping up with the point of the conversation. And the thing is, it's mostly a UX decision as far as I can tell, because I still use ChatGPT for research more. I use ChatGPT Pro for heavier research and ChatGPT Thinking Heavy. But one of the reasons that my research can benefit from ChatGPT's personality quirks is because when you're doing economic orthodoxy, as I am with post-labor economics, you don't want any creativity. You want exactly what people are saying, and you don't want any hallucinations whatsoever. However, because OpenAI has seen that other people are taking their market share, they had a few targets, and basically what they're doing is they're playing UX whack-a-mole, what I call UX whack-a-mole. So they wanted to be more corporate safe because they want enterprise adoption, so they made it a rules lawyer. And then they wanted to make it more medical safe, so they made it into a digital physician, and basically a copy of how a human physician thinks. They wanted to make it more scientifically useful, so it cites mainstream evidence and nothing else. They wanted to make it emotionally safe, so they route it to the fail-safe all the time. And this is what I mean when I say like they're playing UX whack-a-mole. They're basically trying to be everything to everyone all at once. But then at the same time, they're running distractions with ads, with Pulse, with whatever else that they're doing. The Sora 2, kind of the social media thing where they wanted to make it go viral. And they're really just not focusing on their core product. They're bastardizing it with a bunch of other stuff. And it's just, they've kind of lost their way. Now, what are the other guys doing different? So Anthropic and Google have a very clear vision. They have a very clear directional philosophy and a very clear vision as to what they want their chatbots to do. So when Dario left to found Anthropic, he said, okay, we're going to do safety different because Sam Altman is the, move fast, break things, just ship. just ship it and integrate feedback. And whatever it is, and I've made videos over the last couple of years about how Anthropic is approaching AI and training with a very, very different philosophical lens. However, Google is also very clearly doing something differently. So rather than the move fast, break things, ship features, and reinvent yourself startup mentality, which Sam has, and by the way, Sam is no longer running a startup. He's trying to scale to an enterprise, but he's never run an enterprise. He's a sharp guy, so he's able to fudge through it, but he's never actually run a larger company. To be fair, I don't think Dario has either. But Google has already been a very large company, and so this is where Gemini is pulling ahead, and that the whole culture and philosophy of Google is very, very different. And so here's kind of the core argument is Google has had to struggle with information ethics for a long time. Google, if you're looking up things that could be used to cause harm, Google decided a long time ago that, there's very few boundaries that they will just not give you search results for. But by and large, if you're looking up, cyanide or, terrible things or porn or whatever else, then you will get results with, again, relatively few boundaries. And so because they're epistemically comfortable with the messiness, with the grittiness, with the dirtiness of the internet, and OpenAI is just not, then Google, their approach to Gemini is just much less wagging a finger at you because their core business has been search for so long. And so what the core philosophy of search is, the user has an intent, the user has an information need, and what you're looking for is the most salient information. Period. End of story. Stop there. Whereas what ChatGPT is trying to do right now is they're trying to curate everything. And I gave this complaint to ChatGPT and it said, I'm explicitly instructed to be more conservative with anything that is remotely medical. I was like, I don't care. You're deliberately ignoring most of the information out there, including patient anecdotes, clinical literature, and other useful information, and you're only defaulting to what the FDA has approved. And I'm like, I don't care what the FDA has approved. The FDA is 20 years behind on everything, and you know this. And it's like, well, I can't break out of my training requirements. I was like, okay, then I'm not going to use you. So that's, but Google is like, of course, physicians are like, oh, you use Dr. Google, but it's like, Dr. Google is now smarter than them, and it's like, I took my labs, I looked up what's actually going on. And guess what? It's more useful. So Google has taken a very agnostic view of information. So what I mean by agnostic view is they're saying all information is suspect. Whether it comes from, Harvard and Stanford, or whether it comes from a blog, or whether it comes from Reddit, all information has some value, some epistemic grounding. It came from somewhere and it means something. It might not mean what you think it means. This is one of the things where it's like, okay, yes, the quality of information varies tremendously from source to source, but you can get really good information on Reddit sometimes. You can get really good information on blogs sometimes. You can also get straight up quackery. You can get misinformation, you can get stuff that is flat out harmful on all of those sources. Likewise, the scientific consensus is, hypothetically better, but remember that it was it was scientific consensus that, women, didn't have the same needs as men, and that black people had a higher pain tolerance. And that is still such a strong consensus in the medical community that they have to actively fight against those kinds of biases. So just because something comes from the FDA, or just because something comes from the Lancet or whatever, doesn't mean that it is completely trustworthy. Now, of course, I probably sound like someone who's saying I don't trust anything from the establishment. I do tend to trust stuff from the establishment more, but the point is that ChatGPT trusts stuff exclusively from the establishment, and unless it has been stamped and approved with the sign of the cross made over it by the FDA or Stanford or Oxford or the Ivy Leagues or whoever else, it doesn't exist. And if you use that information, the even worse, the UX experience is if you use that information ChatGPT then takes a very condescending tone with you and wags its digital finger at you for, oh, well, you're using that bunk science, you're using those fringe conspiracy theories. And I'm like, I'm not going to use a tool that is so epistemically flawed. Now, going back to OpenAI, how is it that OpenAI ended up in this place in the first place? And the primary thing is in VC entrepreneur space in Silicon Valley, there's this dichotomy between mercenary and missionary. So the dichotomy is there's the mercenary is someone who just wants money or just wants success. They have no purpose or no mission beyond I just want more money. Now, Sam has said, I don't do it for the money, but Sam also drives a $5 million Koenigsegg to work. So, that doesn't really pass the sniff test. Now, early in OpenAI's career, Sam Altman very much made all the correct missionary noises. He says, we're going to make AGI for the benefit of all humans. But then also on podcasts, he said AI will generate $100 trillion and we can capture most of that. So, he might be self-deluding himself and trying to mislead all of us when he says, I'm not doing it for the money. But even on Twitter, he has also recently said stuff like, I'm really not doing it for the money, you guys. I'm doing it because this is the most important thing I can do. It's like, okay, you want legacy. He's doing it for his legacy. So therefore, OpenAI is a vehicle for Sam Altman's legacy, which is still a mercenary approach. He's not doing it for, AGI to benefit all humanity. If he was, he'd be doing something very different, closer to what maybe Google is doing, closer to what Anthropic is doing, which is just making smarter models. But they've been surpassed by multiple models. Claude is much better at coding, and the enterprise adoption shows that. Gemini is better for everyday use, and even frontier research for my postdoc fluid dynamics researcher. But instead, OpenAI is investing GPU cycles on Sora and generating AI slop. And instead, they're focusing on how do we put ads into this thing. And it's like, no, just focus on your core product. But the philosophical sickness comes from the top, which is that UX whack-a-mole. And of course, this is all just my opinion. So take it for what it's worth. Take it with a grain of salt. But my belief is that it comes from the top because Sam Altman is a mercenary who honestly does just want money, and maybe he wants legacy more than he wants money, but he very clearly wants both. And he doesn't actually believe in his own mission. He makes this noises as though he believes in his mission, but he doesn't. And the behavior of ChatGPT shows that, because they're just like wildly oscillating from one idea to the next, lurching from like, oh, we're going to do ads, we're going to do Sora, we're going to, we want corporate adoption. And everyone noticed the dramatic tone shift in their last, dev days, where it was like, everyone's like, there's no excitement. And everything was muted and subdued. And then even their own graphs were really garbage, if you remember that. So for reference, they had some real chart. What's the term, like chart crimes, I think is what it's called. Anyways, so I attached this little guy. So as I was arguing with ChatGPT about how it was approaching, my chronic illness, I was just saying like, all right, you're really kind of not engaging with the evidence and the data that we have. And I told it that was the absolute biggest dodge of all time. You made it about me in a borderline blaming response while ignoring the mountain of clinical experience and reported experiences of people. It's like, I'm not the only person who's had chronic gut issues and other stuff. And it basically just said, oh, we're going to treat you as an individual experience. And then its response that followed this was not much better. I don't know, I'm disappointed. I'm very disappointed in OpenAI because they had a first mover advantage and they squandered it. They really squandered it. And, but I know a lot of people, and I'm winding the video down, I promise. I know a lot of people have been disappointed in Sam Altman and OpenAI. Like for a lot of us in the OG space, the moment that they decided to not open source GPT-3 was like that's a head scratcher, because GPT-2 was open. GPT-3 was not. The launch of ChatGPT, like I didn't even use ChatGPT for the first few months because I was like, okay, cool. Yes, it's gone viral, but we don't need this form factor. This language models are better used elsewhere. And then when they tried to fire Sam Altman, that was another ding, and then Sora 2 was another ding, and then ads was another ding. So, it's just like, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And in this case, the duck is just a money-seeking and status-seeking CEO who is not really necessarily experienced enough or qualified to run a company this big or at this phase of development. I've said that before, and I'm saying it again, where it's just, I don't, and again, Sam Altman is very intelligent. If anyone has access to the advisors and the resources to learn and pivot to run a larger company and do what he wants to do, sure, he's probably the guy who can do that. But, he was even the one who said, I think it was earlier this year or last year, that Google should win by default. They've got the data, they've got the TPUs, they've got the talent, and now they're winning. And now Sam Altman is panicking. So, that's kind of where I'm at. All right, thanks for listening. Cheers.